The mysterious arrival. The sun barely touched the horizon as the sleek, silent shuttle landed on the edge of the city. The ground trembled as its engines powered down, and the thick fog that rolled across the streets seemed to shiver at the sound. A few curious onlookers stood nearby, watching the craft with cautious eyes, wondering who or what might be aboard. The shuttle door hissed open, and a figure stepped out into the cool air. She was young, probably not more than 18 or 19, but there was an air of quiet authority about her that made her seem older. Her face was calm, almost cold, with eyes that seemed to hold more knowledge and experience than any civilian should. Her name was Alina, but few would know that yet. She carried no weapon, no insignia of rank, nothing that marked her as different from the other students who would soon join the school. But those who were paying close attention could see it in the way she moved, like a predator in a field of prey, each step deliberate, controlled. As she walked toward the school grounds, a small group of students gathered at the entrance, gossiping about the new arrival. None of them knew who she was or where she came from, but they all thought the same thing. She was just another fragile human, like the rest of them. Nothing special. Just another student who would fade into the background, another face in the sea of other faces. But what the students didn't know was that this seemingly frail young woman was not as she appeared. She had been forged in the fire of war, tested in ways that no one could imagine. Alina wasn't like them. She had been a legend on the battlefield, a name whispered among soldiers as the one who never lost. But to these students, she was just another face. Her history had been erased, her reputation wiped away in the quiet corner of the universe she now found herself in. Inside the school, the other students were already talking, unaware of the presence of someone who had fought wars on far-off planets. They had no idea that their new classmate had once fought in battles that had torn apart entire civilizations, where survival was a matter of life or death. To them, she was just another student, carrying nothing more than the weight of a backpack and a fragile human body. Her chestnut-colored hair was tied back in a simple braid, her uniform no different from the others, and her posture was soft, almost meek, despite the power that pulsed beneath her skin. As she entered the classroom, the students turned to look at her. A few whispered to each other, guessing what her story might be, while others barely noticed her at all. She slid into a seat at the back of the room, not wanting attention. Her body felt the weight of the chair beneath her, and she allowed herself to relax, if only for a moment. She was no longer a soldier. Here, she was just another student. But that didn't mean she had forgotten how to fight. The teacher, a middle-aged man with a kindly smile, barely acknowledged her presence as he began the day's lesson. Alina didn't mind. She wasn't here to make friends or draw attention to herself. She had one purpose: to live a normal life, to blend in. But deep down, a part of her knew that would be impossible. Her past would always follow her. During the first few hours of class, nothing unusual happened. The students laughed, talked, and joked, their voices carrying across the room like the wind outside. But Alina couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. She didn't turn to look, but she knew. There were a few students who had sensed something in her, something different. Maybe they didn't know exactly what it was, but they could feel it. Then, at lunch, it happened. A group of boys, rough, brash, and clearly wanting to prove themselves, approached her. They were laughing, making jokes at her expense, thinking she was just another weakling to bully. They had no idea who she was. To them, she was just another girl with no backbone, an easy target. "Hey, newbie," one of them said, leaning against her table with a smug grin. "You looking for a friend or what?" Alina didn't even look up from her food. She could feel their eyes on her, feel the weight of their presence, but she ignored them. She had learned long ago that silence could be a weapon. "Are you deaf or just plain dumb?" The boy continued, reaching out to tap her shoulder. His fingers barely brushed her jacket before she moved, faster than anyone could see. In one smooth motion, Alina grabbed his wrist, twisting it with such force that the boy gasped in pain. The others froze, watching in shock as she held him in place, not a muscle in her face betraying any emotion. There was no anger in her eyes, no fear, just the cold, controlled focus of someone who had been through worse. "Don't touch me again," she said softly, her voice calm but firm. The boy stammered, struggling to free himself, but he quickly realized he couldn't. The others hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to intervene. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Finally, the boy pulled back, his face flushed with embarrassment and fear. Alina let go of his wrist and turned her attention back to her food. The moment had passed, but the whispers had just begun. The class, though unaware of her true identity, couldn't ignore what had just happened. Alina had shown them a side of herself they hadn't expected. The frail human. No, there was something more beneath the surface, something they were beginning to realize, but they still didn't understand. What they didn't know was that Alina wasn't here to show them her power. She was here because she had to be. And no matter how hard she tried to hide it, her past was never going to let her forget who she truly was. The stage was set. The mystery of who she was would unfold over time, but the truth would come with a price. The hidden power. The days that followed were filled with the humdrum of normal school life. Except for one thing. Alina couldn't quite shake the feeling that she was being watched. It was subtle at first, the glances from her classmates when they thought she wasn't looking, the whispers behind her back, and the soft murmur of curiosity in the hallways. The incident at lunch had made her a subject of interest, but not in the way she had expected. Her classmates still thought she was weak. They saw the way she kept to herself, her quiet demeanor in class, and her general avoidance of physical activity. Alina didn't mind it. She had learned long ago that blending in was the safest choice, but there were moments when her mind drifted back to her days as a soldier. A battlefield was a harsh teacher, and it was hard to ignore the instincts that had been ingrained in her over the years. One afternoon, during gym class, Alina had a chance to test her limits without anyone knowing. The class had been split into teams for a game of dodgeball. The students, excited by the chance to play, were eager to show off their skills. As Alina stood on the sidelines, watching her classmates toss the ball, she felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, something she had not felt in a long time. The soft thud of the ball hitting the floor, the shouts of her classmates as they tried to dodge the throws. It brought back memories of the chaos of war. Suddenly, a stray ball came flying her way. Without thinking, Alina's body moved on instinct. She darted forward, faster than anyone could track, and caught the ball midair, her fingers closing around it with precision. The class fell silent. Her grip on the ball was firm, but her expression remained calm and unreadable. "Nice catch," one of the boys said, not realizing how close he was to being hit by her reaction speed. Alina simply nodded, her eyes scanning the field. She had no intention of showing off, but the truth was undeniable. The energy within her, the power that had once dominated the battlefield, was still there, lying dormant, just waiting to be released. Her classmates, still oblivious to her true abilities, laughed it off, assuming it was just a lucky move. But Alina knew better. Her reflexes were honed to a level that most people couldn't even begin to comprehend. As the game continued, Alina allowed herself to participate more actively, but only in ways that wouldn't reveal too much. She dodged, blocked, and occasionally threw the ball with surprising speed and accuracy, all while maintaining the appearance of a harmless, fragile student. No one suspected a thing. They thought it was just a coincidence, nothing more. But one student, a boy named Liam, began to notice. He had seen the quickness in her movements, the almost effortless way she caught the ball. There was something about her that didn't add up, something that tugged at the back of his mind. Liam wasn't the kind of person to let a mystery slip away, and Alina had unknowingly sparked his curiosity. After gym class, he approached her. He wasn't aggressive, just inquisitive. "You're not really that bad at sports," he said with a half smile. "I thought you were, well, kind of fragile." Elena glanced at him, her face impassive. She knew what he was doing. He had caught a glimpse of her potential, and now he wanted to know more. But Elena wasn't ready to let anyone get too close. "I've just been practicing," she said softly, her voice betraying nothing of the warrior she had once been. She didn't want anyone to know her past. Not yet. Not here. Liam stared at her for a moment longer, unsure if she was joking or if there was something deeper behind her words. "Right. Well, you should join the next game. You might surprise everyone." Elena didn't respond. She didn't need to. The more she remained silent, the more people would assume she was just an ordinary girl. The harder she worked to blend in, the more she could keep her secret hidden. But Liam wasn't so easily deterred. Over the next few days, he continued to watch her. He saw how Elena moved with an eerie sense of precision and grace. She was always calm, never rushing, never showing any sign of strain. It was as if she didn't need to try. He wondered if there was more to her than what met the eye. One day, during a break between classes, he decided to test his theory. Liam stood by the school's courtyard, casually tossing a ball against the wall, waiting for her to pass by. When she did, he made his move. "Hey, Elena," Liam called, tossing the ball gently toward her. "Catch." It was a simple challenge. Elena, who had seen him coming, was already prepared. But instead of just catching the ball as she had in gym class, she did something different. With a fluid motion, she caught it mid-air and with a flick of her wrist, sent it flying back with a speed that sent Liam stumbling back in surprise. The ball ricocheted off the wall and bounced out of his reach. For the first time, Elena looked at him directly, her eyes sharp and calculating. "You're persistent," she said, her voice low. It wasn't an invitation for friendship, but it wasn't a dismissal either. She had acknowledged him. Liam was left standing there, stunned by her reaction, as Elena walked away. He knew one thing for certain now. She wasn't just some fragile human. She was something far more dangerous, a hidden power walking among them. And it was only a matter of time before everyone else found out. But Elena wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Her power had to stay hidden, buried beneath the surface. For now, she was content with letting her classmates believe she was nothing more than a normal student. What they didn't know was that her real battle was just beginning. And it wasn't with her classmates, it was with herself. Whispers of her past. The days passed, but Elena's calm exterior began to fray at the edges. It wasn't the constant whispers in the hallways that bothered her. She'd learned long ago to ignore idle chatter. What unsettled her was the growing sense of recognition from her peers. Something in the way they watched her, some instinct deep inside them, was starting to pick at the fragile veil she'd so carefully placed over her past. Liam, in particular, seemed unable to shake his curiosity. His persistence wasn't aggressive, but it was constant. He had started to make subtle comments, innocent questions, about where she was from, or why she acted so differently. But Elena knew better than to answer him. Her past was a world away, buried beneath layers of time and distance. The last thing she wanted was for someone to pry too deep. She couldn't afford for anyone to find out who she really was. The memories of her former life, of the battlefield where she'd been both feared and revered, were too dangerous to resurface. But despite her best efforts, the rumors continued to spread. Students whispered about her speed, the way she moved with almost supernatural precision. Some began to wonder if she had military training, if she was somehow connected to the stories of a legendary fighter who had disappeared years ago. It didn't help that the teachers, who kept a close eye on their students, had taken a strange interest in Elena as well. There were moments when they would look at her with knowing glances, as if they were aware of something she wasn't sharing. One afternoon, as Elena sat alone in the library, she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. Two students, huddled at a nearby table, were discussing her. "You know, I heard she might be the one," one of them whispered, her voice hushed but urgent. "The one they used to call the ghost." "The ghost," her friend replied, clearly confused. "Yeah, The first girl continued, lowering her voice even further. They said she was this unbeatable soldier who vanished after the war ended. I bet it's her. I bet she's the ghost. No one else could have moved that fast in gym class. Alina's breath caught in her throat. The ghost. The name had haunted her dreams for years. It was a title she had earned after years of brutal fighting, of surviving battles that no one else could. She had been the phantom on the battlefield, striking from the shadows, unstoppable. The name was a legend, one that had been passed down among soldiers like a ghost story told to scare new recruits. But she wasn't that person anymore. She couldn't be. The war had taken everything from her, and the ghost was a part of her she had buried deep inside. She wasn't that killer anymore. She was trying to be something else. Someone else. Alina stood up, her mind racing. She needed to get out of there. She couldn't let anyone find out. Not yet. Her heart was pounding in her chest as she quickly gathered her things. The whispers had already started, and if they spread, there would be no way to stop them. She walked briskly through the hallways, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling settling in her stomach. But as she rounded a corner, she nearly collided with Liam. "Hey, Alina," he said casually, stepping aside just in time to let her pass. "I've been meaning to ask, do you ever talk about your past?" Alina's heart skipped a beat. His voice was casual, but there was a spark of curiosity in his eyes, and it sent a chill down her spine. She had known this moment would come, but she had hoped it wouldn't be so soon. "I don't have much to say about it," Alina replied, her voice even and controlled. She didn't want to give him any more fuel for his questions. "I'm just here to learn, like everyone else." Liam looked at her for a moment longer, as if trying to gauge her reaction. "Sure, I get it," he said, though there was an edge to his tone that made Alina wonder if he truly believed her. "But you don't have to hide who you are, you know. You're not just anyone, Alina. There's something about you. I can see it. I think everyone can." Alina took a step back, her eyes narrowing. He was getting closer to the truth, and she couldn't allow that. Not yet. She didn't want to hurt anyone. She didn't want anyone else to know what she had been through. "I'm not hiding anything," she said firmly, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm just trying to be normal. Don't make it harder than it has to be." Liam didn't seem convinced, but he didn't press her any further. He just nodded, looking thoughtful. As he walked away, Alina let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She couldn't afford to let him get too close. She couldn't afford to let anyone get too close. The truth was, she wasn't just hiding from her classmates. She was hiding from herself. She had thought she could leave her past behind, but it was clear that it would follow her, no matter where she went. Later that evening, as Alina lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, she couldn't shake the feeling that her carefully constructed world was starting to crumble. The whispers were growing louder. Soon, everyone would know. And when they did, she wouldn't be just a student anymore. She would be the ghost, a living legend, a soldier who couldn't escape her past. But as much as Alina tried to push it away, the truth was clear. Her past would never let her go. And sooner or later, her classmates would find out the truth. They would learn what she had done, who she had been, and they would realize that the frail, quiet human they had underestimated was anything but ordinary. And then everything would change. An unexpected challenge. The tension that had been simmering beneath the surface for days finally bubbled to the top. Alina could feel it in the air. The whispers had reached their peak, and it was only a matter of time before someone would challenge her. She couldn't hide in the shadows forever. Every time she stepped into a room, it seemed like the eyes of her classmates were on her, questioning her, analyzing her every movement. Then came the announcement that would change everything. The school was organizing a tournament, a friendly competition between students to see who was the best in physical challenges. The event was meant to be fun, but to many of the students, it was an opportunity to prove something. It was a chance to show off their strength, speed, and athleticism, to claim bragging rights in front of their peers. The tournament was a big deal, and every student was encouraged to participate. Alina knew this was coming. She could sense it. Her classmates had been sizing her up, and now they had a chance to test her. She tried to tell herself that it didn't matter, that she could just sit out and avoid the attention. But deep down, she knew that wasn't an option. She couldn't escape this challenge. And more importantly, she knew they were watching her, waiting for her to make a move. The day of the tournament arrived, and Alina stood on the edge of the field, watching as the students warmed up. The noise of the crowd and the buzz of excitement filled the air. But Alina remained still, focused. She had participated in wars, where the stakes had been far higher. But this was a different kind of battle. She had to make sure she didn't reveal too much. If she did, the truth about who she really was would come crashing down. Liam, of course, was among the first to approach her. He was already stretched and ready, his competitive nature shining through. "Hey, Alina," he said, grinning. "You're in, right? I know you've got some moves. Don't hide it from us." Alina didn't answer right away. Instead, she simply gave him a small nod, her expression unreadable. "I'll see," she said, keeping her tone neutral. She didn't want to get too involved, didn't want to show him anything he could use against her, but she knew that wouldn't be possible. Eventually, the tournament would require her to take part, whether she liked it or not. The first few rounds of the tournament were standard. Students competed in basic challenges, sprints, obstacle courses, and strength tests. Alina watched from the sidelines, keeping her distance, letting the other students duke it out. Some performed better than others, but none seemed to stand out. It was all just a warm-up. Then came the relay race, where teams would compete in a race that combined speed and coordination. Alina had no choice but to participate. She had been selected as part of one of the teams, and it was clear from the start that her classmates were eager to see what she could do. As the race began, Alina's team lagged behind, struggling to gain any ground. The first few runners were fast, but none had the coordination or precision to make it through without stumbling. Alina's turn was next, and she could feel the eyes of everyone on her. They were all waiting to see if she would disappoint them, waiting to see if she would fall short of the expectations they had of her. Alina lined up at the starting point. Her legs were tense, her focus sharpened. She had trained for this, not in a classroom or a gym, but in the heat of combat, in situations where failure meant death. This race was trivial, but the challenge of controlling her instincts was real. She couldn't let herself go all out. Not yet. She had to keep her power contained. The signal was given, and she took off. In an instant, her body reacted, moving like a well-oiled machine. Her legs surged forward, faster than anyone could follow. Her speed was a blur, and within seconds, she had overtaken the other runners. The crowd gasped in awe. Some cheered, some stood frozen in shock. Alina's teammates barely had time to react as she passed them the baton. She didn't break her stride, didn't slow down. She didn't need to. Her movements were perfect, effortless, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. As she finished her leg of the race, Alina glanced at the others. The students stood there, staring at her in disbelief. It was too fast, too precise. They had expected her to struggle, to be clumsy. But instead, she had made it look easy, as if the race were child's play. The team ended up winning the relay race, but the real victory was in what Alina had just shown them. Her classmates had underestimated her. They had thought her to be nothing more than a fragile student, a weakling who couldn't even keep up with basic tasks. But now, they knew differently. Liam, who had been watching from the sidelines, came up to her after the race, his face a mix of admiration and confusion. "That was insane," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "How did you?" Alina didn't give him a chance to finish. She simply walked away, leaving him standing there with his question unanswered. She didn't want to reveal anything more than necessary. But inside, she felt the weight of what she had just done. She had taken the first step in revealing her true potential, and there was no turning back now. The tournament was far from over, but one thing was clear. Her classmates had seen a glimpse of the real Alina, and that glimpse would be enough to make them question everything they thought they knew about her. The next challenge would be even harder, but Alina had faced far worse in her life. This was nothing more than a test, and she would pass it, just as she had passed every trial before. The unveiling. As the days of the tournament passed, Alina could feel the tension growing. Her classmates were no longer dismissing her as a weak, fragile human. They had seen her speed, her skill, and her precision, but they didn't fully understand what she was capable of. They didn't know the depths of her abilities or the true extent of the strength that she had hidden for so long. The final event of the tournament loomed. It was the one challenge everyone had been waiting for. The combat duel. One-on-one, students would face off in a test of physical and mental strength. The rules were simple. No weapons, no tricks, just pure hand-to-hand combat. The winner would be crowned the champion of the tournament, and the title would grant them respect and prestige in the school. Alina knew this was coming. She had been avoiding it as long as she could, but now there was no way out. The class was buzzing with excitement, each student eager to see who would come out on top. Alina, however, didn't share their excitement. She had fought in wars, faced enemies who had no mercy, and survived battles that had torn apart entire cities. To her, this tournament was nothing more than a child's game. But the risk of revealing her true self loomed larger than ever. She had to be careful. One wrong move, one slip of the mask, and everything she had worked for would come crashing down. As the tournament progressed, Alina watched from the sidelines, quietly observing the other students. Many of them were strong, physically, at least, but none of them had the experience or the discipline that Alina possessed. She could see the way they moved, the way they fought, and she knew they wouldn't stand a chance against her if she revealed everything. Then the final duel was announced. Alina's name was called, and her opponent was Liam. Her heart sank. She had been avoiding this moment for so long, but now she couldn't escape it. Liam had grown curious, and now it seemed he was determined to uncover her secrets. He had no idea what he was in for. Liam stepped into the ring, looking confident, his eyes filled with determination. He was a good fighter, fast, agile, and strong. But against Alina, he was out of his league. He had no idea that he was about to face someone who had fought battles far more brutal than anything he could imagine. Alina stepped forward, her body calm, her mind sharp. She kept her movements slow, controlled, hiding the tension beneath the surface. She didn't want to hurt him. She didn't want to expose everything she had been running from. But she also knew that if she held back too much, she would risk losing, and that would only fuel the rumors even more. The match began, and Liam rushed toward her, his movements fast and fluid. He threw a series of punches, testing her defenses. Alina dodged easily, her body moving with an elegance that seemed almost unnatural. She could feel the eyes of the crowd on her, but she kept her focus on Liam. He was fast, but he was predictable. He was a student, a beginner in comparison to the soldiers she had fought alongside. Liam's strikes grew more aggressive, but Alina remained calm, avoiding each one with ease. She didn't need to block every punch. She simply let them glide past her, saving her energy for the moment when she would have to strike back. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Liam made a mistake. He lunged forward, overcommitting to an attack, leaving himself open. Alina saw the opportunity and took it. In a flash, she grabbed his arm, twisting it behind his back in a move that was so fast, so precise, that the crowd gasped in shock. Liam struggled, but it was no use. Alina had him pinned, her grip unyielding. She didn't hurt him. She didn't need to. But she made it clear that she could end the match at any moment. The tension in the arena was palpable, the silence deafening. No one had ever seen anything like this before. Liam froze, realizing he was outmatched. His chest heaved as he tried to catch his breath. His face flushed with embarrassment. For the first time since the tournament began, he was no longer the confident, cocky fighter. He was just another student, struggling to keep up with someone far stronger than he could ever understand. Alina slowly released him, stepping back. She didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. She had won, but the victory felt hollow. She had only used a fraction of her strength, but that was enough to show Liam, and everyone else, that she was far more than just a frail human. The audience was still silent as Alina stood there, her chest rising and falling with each breath. She could see the stunned looks on the faces of her classmates. They had all thought she was weak. They had all underestimated her, but now they knew the truth. Liam, his face red with frustration and awe, finally spoke. "How did you?" His voice was barely a whisper, but Alina didn't answer him. She didn't need to. The truth had been revealed. She turned and walked out of the ring, her footsteps steady and unbothered. The students watched her go, the realization dawning on them. Alina was no ordinary student. She wasn't just another human. She was a living legend, someone who had survived the unimaginable and still stood strong. The ghost, the warrior, and now they had seen her power for themselves. But for Alina, it wasn't about the victory. It never had been. It was about the cost of revealing her true self. She had shown them her strength, but at what price? She could never go back to being just another student. Her past had caught up with her, and now there was no hiding from it. The game had changed, and Alina knew that her life at this school would never be the same again. The truth exposed. The next few days were unlike any Alina had experienced before. Her classmates treated her differently now, their eyes no longer filled with doubt, but with a mixture of awe and fear. The whispers had spread like wildfire. The ghost, they called her. Some saw her as a hero, others as a mystery, and some even regarded her as a threat. But one thing was certain: no one underestimated her anymore. Alina had hoped to return to her life of quiet anonymity. She had tried to live as a normal student, to blend in, but the moment she revealed her strength, everything had changed. She was no longer just Alina. She was the warrior, the legend, and that was a title she had never wanted to claim again. It wasn't long before the teachers began to take notice too. They had seen Alina's potential in the tournament, and though they had no proof, they could feel the undercurrent of something more beneath her calm demeanor. There was a knowing look in their eyes, an understanding that they were in the presence of someone who had lived through unimaginable experiences. One afternoon after class, Alina was summoned to the principal's office. Her heart raced as she made her way through the quiet hallways, the weight of uncertainty pressing on her chest. She had known this day would come. She had known that eventually someone would figure it out. As she entered the office, she saw the principal, Mr. Hargrove, sitting behind his desk. His sharp gaze met hers, and his expression was unreadable. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised. But there was something in his eyes that made her uneasy. "Alina," he began, his voice calm, yet firm. "Please, have a seat." She took the chair across from his desk, trying to keep her composure. She had been trained for situations like this, but this was different. This wasn't a battlefield, and there was no way to fight her way out of this conversation. Her past was catching up with her, and there was no escaping it. "I've heard a lot of things about you," Mr. Hargrove continued, his voice low. "About your performance during the tournament." Alina didn't respond. She wasn't about to deny it. She knew exactly what he was referring to. The way she had handled herself in the duel, the way her skills had been unlike anything anyone had seen before. It was clear that the truth was out, at least in some form. He didn't need to say the words. She knew what was coming. "I don't want to make assumptions, Alina," he said, leaning forward slightly. "But I've heard rumors about your background, your history." Alina's stomach clenched. She could feel the walls closing in around her. The time had come to either confirm or deny the rumors, and she wasn't sure what the right answer was anymore. She had spent so long hiding her past, keeping it buried deep within, but now it was impossible to ignore. "What have you heard?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Hargrove studied her for a moment, as if weighing the decision of whether to press her further. Finally, he spoke. "I've heard that you were once a soldier who fought in the war, a soldier who was known as the Ghost." Alina's breath caught in her throat. The name, the Ghost, it had haunted her for years, and now it had come back to haunt her in this very room. "I don't want to cause trouble," Mr. Hargrove continued, his voice softening. "But I think it's important that you know that your classmates, your peers, they are looking to you for answers. They want to know who you really are." Alina's mind raced. She knew this day would come, but she had hoped to delay it for as long as possible. But now the truth was out, and there was no hiding from it. "You're right," she said, finally breaking their silence. "I'm not who I appear to be. I'm not just some student who got lucky in a tournament." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I was a soldier. I fought in the war. And yes, I was called the Ghost." Mr. Hargrove nodded, his expression understanding but still serious. "I thought as much. Alina, you don't have to tell me everything. I know that you're not here to relive that past. But you need to understand that this will change things for you. The students, your classmates, they'll look at you differently now." "I know," Alina replied, her voice steady. "I've already felt it." There was a long pause as Mr. Hargrove considered her words. Finally, he spoke again. "Alina, you've proven yourself to be capable. You're strong, and you're resilient. But I need you to understand that with that strength comes responsibility. You can't just hide anymore. Your classmates look up to you now. They know you're different, and they need to understand who you are, not just the warrior, but the person you are now." Alina swallowed hard. She had spent years running from her past, from the things she had done, and the person she had been. But now, it seemed there was no escaping it. She couldn't hide in the shadows forever. Her classmates were starting to see her for what she really was, and she could either face that reality or continue to live in fear of being exposed. "I'm not the same person I was during the war," she said quietly. "I don't want to be that person anymore. I just want to live like anyone else." Mr. Hargrove's expression softened, his tone reassuring. "I understand, Alina. But remember, who you are now is shaped by everything you've been through. Your past, no matter how hard it may be to face, is part of you, and you don't have to carry it alone." Alina felt a weight lift from her shoulders, but the road ahead still felt uncertain. She wasn't ready to reveal everything. Not yet, but she knew that her past was no longer something she could bury. As she stood to leave the office, Mr. Hargrove gave her a nod. "You've got a lot of people here who respect you, Alina. Don't forget that." Alina nodded, her thoughts swirling. She had exposed part of herself to the world, and though it terrified her, she knew it was the first step toward truly moving forward. She couldn't hide from her past forever, but maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to use it for something greater than war. The truth had been exposed, but Alina's journey was far from over. The questions had only just begun. The final lesson. The days that followed the revelation of Alina's past were filled with new challenges. Her classmates now looked at her with a mixture of respect, fear, and curiosity. There were whispers wherever she went, questions in their eyes that they didn't dare ask out loud. Alina could feel the weight of their gazes pressing on her, and yet there was also a sense of relief. The truth had finally come to light, and though it hadn't been easy, it was out there now. There was no going back. Alina found herself torn. Part of her wanted to retreat even further, to hide and remain the quiet, unassuming student she had once been. But another part of her knew that she couldn't. Her classmates needed something from her, something she hadn't realized they were seeking. They needed to understand what it truly meant to be strong, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. For the first time in a long while, Alina began to open up to the people around her. She didn't speak much about her past, but when the moment felt right, she shared pieces of herself, small truths about the struggles she had faced, about the sacrifices she had made. Her classmates listened, not with judgment, but with a quiet understanding. They realized that her strength was not just a result of her physical abilities, but of the battles she had fought in her own mind and heart. One afternoon, as she sat in the cafeteria, a group of students approached her. Liam, who had become one of the few to regularly talk to her since the tournament, was with them. He had become curious, not just about her abilities, but about who she truly was as a person. They all sat down around her, and for the first time, Elena didn't feel the need to pull away. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said in the tournament," Liam began, his voice sincere. "You could have easily beaten me in a way that would have embarrassed me in front of everyone, but you didn't. Why?" Elena looked at him, her gaze steady. She had been asked that question before, but this time, it felt different. She had already shown them the strength she possessed. Now, it was time to show them the strength she had learned to control. "Because," she began, her voice soft but firm, "there's more to strength than just winning a fight. I've learned that it's not always about being the strongest or the fastest. It's about knowing when to fight and when to walk away. It's about knowing when to protect others, and sometimes knowing when to protect yourself." The students around her were quiet, taking in her words. They had expected her to boast, to revel in her victory. But instead, she had shown them something far more valuable: wisdom, humility, and the understanding that true power comes from within. Another student, a girl named Sarah, spoke up. "I think we all thought you were just this untouchable warrior, but you've shown us that you're more than that. You've been through things we can't even imagine, and you're still here, still standing." Elena smiled, a faint, sad smile. "I didn't survive by being untouchable," she replied. "I survived by learning from my mistakes and by choosing when to fight and when to walk away. Strength isn't always about physical power. It's about resilience, about carrying on even when everything around you tells you to stop." The conversation shifted from one about strength and battle to one about life, about the choices they made every day. Elena found herself sharing more than she ever had before, opening up about the struggles she had faced, about the loss, the guilt, and the scars that ran deeper than anything visible. It wasn't easy, but with every word she spoke, it felt like a weight was lifted. For the first time, she didn't feel like a soldier. She felt like a person, just like everyone else. As the weeks passed, Elena found a new rhythm in her life at the school. She still kept to herself at times, still found solace in solitude, but she also learned to connect with those around her. She became a quiet leader, someone who others could turn to not for her strength in battle, but for her wisdom and understanding. Her classmates no longer saw her as a distant, untouchable warrior. They saw her as someone who had been through the darkest of times and had come out the other side stronger for it. And yet, despite all the connections she was making, Elena knew that she would never fully escape her past. The ghost would always be a part of her. The memories, the battles, the pain, they would always be with her, lingering in the background. But she had learned something important. Her past didn't define her. She could carry it with her, learn from it, but it didn't have to control her. She was more than the soldier she had once been. She was someone who had found peace, someone who had learned to balance the lessons of war with the hope for a better future. One evening, as Elena stood by the window, looking out at the peaceful campus below, she realized that she was finally ready to move on. She didn't need to forget her past, but she could use it to shape her future, to guide her through the uncertain path ahead. And in that moment, Elena understood the final lesson. Strength doesn't lie in how many battles you win, but in how you live after them. She had faced the hardest battles of all, those fought within, and had emerged victorious. She was no longer the ghost, the soldier. She was simply Elena, a young woman with a past, a future, and the strength to walk her own path. The end of one journey was merely the beginning of another. And now, Elena was ready for whatever came next.